First, I'd just like to thank the Rotary for coming out so early and my other colleagues for introducing some of the ideas I'll be talking about. I was asked to talk about the role of higher education in business incubation, and I think, we've talked somewhat historically, but this is something that our founding fathers recognized in the Northwest Ordinance back in 787, that the role of education is not just about economic development, it's about the social development of our world and the defender of our democracy in the ways in which we understand things. And we've heard some of that discussion. I do want to challenge some underlying assumptions. I've heard a lot about business competitiveness and innovation. This is not an economic activity as much as it is a social activity. And in fact, if you think of the greatest innovations here in the United States, business did not create them. The internet was not a business activity. Your cell phone was not a business activity. Global telecommunications was not a business activity. That was all government-funded, government-sponsored research, and the government being the sole purchaser of that technology for about 30 years. And so when we talk about the Silicon Valley, we need to talk about all the federal investments. Here, Global Foundries, I think I respectfully disagree about did we spend large dollars. 1.2 billion was this low number that I've heard to attract Global Foundries here. 1.8 billion is the upper number that I've heard. And that doesn't count all the ancillary lower cost expenditures for providing public education that's going to come, providing the road, providing the maintenance for those roads for all these communities. Government has, for the longest time, addressed what we know as a market failure to invest in innovation. This has been historically true. It remains true today. The future of innovation is really dependent on our society accepting its role in leadership. Innovation requires social commitments, social change, policy innovations. I talk about business incubators. 30 years ago, nobody knew what a business incubator was. Today, there's over 1,000 of them in the United States. This was a policy innovation that's been invested in primarily from public sources. When we look at the business incubation world today, roughly about 94% are publicly funded. There's only 6% that are private institutions. So this was a policy innovation. We talk about these things as if competitiveness is the goal, but it's cooperation that drives it. We look at social change, women in the workforce. Well, that was a huge social innovation that provided another 50% of our intellectual capacity to make contributions to our world. And so when I think about this, the role of higher education as business incubator, I'll narrow it back down to what is a business incubator. Technically today, if you're researching them, and with much deference to Jim and much deference to Laura, technically when we define them, it's a multi-tenant facility with on-site management that delivers an array of business services to start-up companies. That's really different than what we're calling an incubator over at the Nana School. It's really different than the incubators that have been run by the SPDC here in Albany, but that's a technical definition. Do we have incubation without walls, which is essentially an incubation program that does not have a multi-tenant facility, but still has this delivery of on-site, these skill sets to entrepreneurs that are really designed to correct three problems: access to capital, poor managerial skills, and poor understanding of market mechanisms, which are the three key reasons small businesses and startup businesses fail. So if we look at this, and the theory of incubation is to address those three failures. And so one of the ways, how do they address access to capital? Well, if you look historically at the research, there's clearly better access to private sources of capital, particularly venture and seed funds, if you're in an incubator, relative to being in a small business in your garage. Another way in which they address this is they generally provide below market rents to be part of that facility. And the third way in which they address this is they reduce the transaction cost of actually locating the services that are necessary to be successful. How do you find the right lawyer? How do you get your patent protected? How do you go about actually incorporating the businesses? If you're on your own and trying to figure that out, those costs are very high to you. But within the incubator, these services are provided directly, reducing your costs. They address the managerial expertise, the marketing expertise, through this array of business services that they are provided, which is the core of the incubation program. There's a set of best practices out there. I could spend a lot of time telling you what they are. But typically, the one that gets overlooked is that they need to be embedded in their community. It's the network of relationships, not just with business service providers and the entrepreneurial community, but also with the people in the economic development world, the public sector. and their engagement with the universities that have been known to have great effect and positive effects on client firms. So business incubation, if you look at it, roughly of all the 1,000 incubators that now exist, which was in 1986, there were 12. So that'll give you a sense of the growth. 21% of them are located at university campuses or have a tight association. If you look at the world of just technology business incubation, that number rises to a little over 44%. This has had proven demonstrable effects on client firms. These include the access to specialized knowledge and equipment. It confers legitimacy in the marketplace. Compare, Joe and Jan in their basement trying to create the next innovation and going to a funder and say, hey, I've got the next best idea. Compare that to Jim and Jill, who's in a business incubator associated with an institution of high tech, and say, I'm located at the business incubator in RPI. Well, that confers legitimacy immediately in the marketplace. From the point of view of the university, it creates opportunities for researching and learning. It creates opportunities to attract new kinds of faculty and students to your institution. So it is a two-way street. Both institutions actually benefit from it. What do we know about outcomes with business incubation? Well, typically, if you look at the data, you look at the barrier research, somewhere between 70 and 86% of firms that are associated with business incubators survive after 5 years. The Small Business Development Administration pegs that number for 5 years. That's somewhere around 50% now. Is that right, Jim? It's roughly about 50% of firms at 5 years are successful. So it's not quite double, though it's quite a bit a high return. The high return on public investment, anywhere between $1 and $7 of return in public investment. That means for every $1 public, they're getting back in terms of taxes from the firms and their employees, anywhere between $1 and $7. And so it's been a good return on public investment. Cost per job created. Well, it has the lowest cost per job created than any other economic development tool out there. Recently, the EDA, the national level, suggested that runs at about $100 per job for public dollar invested. The highest estimate I've seen is roughly $13,000. Work that I've done on other economic development tools in New Jersey, $44,000 for industrial retention and industrial recruitment jobs. And so if we look at the cost per job for bringing in AMD, I don't think it's going to be $13,000. I think it's going to be considerably higher. The other thing is that entrepreneurs tend to be very footloose. How do you attract and retain them? Part of the answer is quality of life. Part of the answer is access to information and technology that they need. Incubators anchor their client firms that when they graduate, they locate in their host region somewhere between 70 and 85% of the time. Which means that if you're producing twice the number of firms that are successful and they're locating locally, that you can actually begin to see the effect on an entrepreneurial climate in a community. And with that, I'll close my remarks and leave you open for questions. Thank you for your time.